Hello, everybody. Welcome back to day two. I am so excited to hear what you guys have come back with and like what discoveries you've had. So, tell me in the chat, like, what number do you think you are? Are you somebody who has thought you were one number for a really long time and now you might be thinking that you're a different number? Tell me that. This is so common. And I want to talk about something that both Sue and Regina have brought up in the chat. And that is, I'm struggling to determine what number I actually am versus the number that I want to be. And this is key. And this is why I really want you to hold your Enneagram number very lightly when you first learn it, because there definitely is some ego stuff here. And let me just kind of just give you kind of the 101. So the Enneagram is so powerful and more powerful than like so many other personality instruments because it does kind of give a reading to your ego. It kind of outs your ego a little bit. And so when you read your type, you can have, sometimes people describe a deep or visceral reaction because you're like, oh, I mean, you're going to read things about yourself that just aren't flattering. And so it can be like, oh, there's no way that can't be me. I don't want that to be me. So if you're joining me, drop your type and let me know if you're kind of in between a couple of types, if you think your type has changed. So let me just give you an example. And this is, I'm so glad that Sue and Regina both said this, is like, they're in there and I did the same thing. I got an initial type back of a type 1. And I read it and I was like, oh, this sounds good. Like ones like to be good and they want to be perfect and they want to be seen as good and right and avoid mistakes and they bring wisdom to the world. And I was like, ooh, yeah, like that's me. And I did resonate a lot with a 1. And I remember I would read some of the other types and I would come across type 5 and I'm like, that's not me. And I'm like, that's like the professor curmudgeon type, like the people who sit behind computers all day and don't want to talk to anyone. And there was just parts in there that just like I didn't want to see or I didn't want to believe. And so I would just kind of skip over it, even though I was kind of like, okay, and so notice that about yourself. And I think the powerful question that both Regina and Sue have posed to all of us is to hold your number very lightly and to also be brave enough to ask yourself, what number am I truly? Like, what number has really outed my ego, called me out, whatever that looks like, versus what number do I want to be? Because to be honest, the more I study the Enneagram, and I was just in an Enneagram class this morning and we're going around, we're talking about all the types, man, I would love to be a 7. There's so, are any 7s on here with me? Again, tell me in the chat what your type is. I'm like, they're so carefree and fun loving and they take in life. They have this zest for life and they experience all the things, but I am not a 7. I'm not even a 1, even though I thought a 1 would be kind of cool to be a 1 because there's just something, maybe it's because I have so many 1s in my life that I just adore. And so there is just kind of that quality about them that I admire. So yes, I would ask yourself, what type truly resonates with me? What hits me a little bit? Like I've been called out. And I know that this, reading your Enneagram can be tough. It was tough for me to learn how I hide from people as a 5. It was tough for me to learn how I set sometimes unnecessary high walls and boundaries just to keep people out, to protect my energy that isn't helpful. It's really hard for me to read about how I compartmentalize my life. It's really hard for me to read about how I can be seen as emotionally stingy. Like I'm just not good with emotional generosity. That's hard for me to read. And those things that are hard for me to read also provide my biggest growth opportunities. And as a leader, had I known some of these things when I was in corporate America, I probably could have given people better information, better support, more of my time. I would have structured my day different. Like just so much would have been different. So I could have been a better leader, not only for my company, but for my team. So I just want to start with just kind of that you might be reading some things that make you go, ooh, and that's okay because all of our pain can be transformed into a purpose. And these things about ourselves that we read provide the base for incredible transformation. That's why this self-knowledge is so powerful. It provides us a place to transform. So Teresa, you're a 2. Karen, yeah, yes, please, a 7. Karen, but you have a 7 wing as an 8, and I'm excited to dive into that more with you and how you can access that. And Teresa, you and I were chatting on the other post, your 1 and 7 were tied. So, okay, perfect. So I want to talk today about how you can make the mindset shift, okay? Yesterday was all about finding your number and how this self-knowledge is really important because it gives you clues into fears that are holding you back, unconscious habits, all these sorts of things. Like this self-knowledge is powerful because you're like, whoa, explains so much. Now I know why people perceive me this way or why I've gotten feedback like this. Today is all about shifting your mindset and how not to let your core fears hold you back, so you can overcome your triggers. So I'm going to talk about each type's triggers and then some leadership building questions and some coaching questions you can use. So Brittany, you're a 2 with a 1 right behind it. Awesome. So you have a 1 wing as a 2, which means that's well developed for you, which means it can be an awesome place to jump into some of your problem solving. Use your 1 wing. Okay, so each type, I have a model in your workbook that just talks about how we kind of exist in the human condition, right? Like, guys, we're always going to have triggers in our life. We're always going to be put into circumstances that aren't ideal. People are going to act a certain way. People are going to show up a certain way. Our companies are going to do things that we don't agree with. There's always going to be triggers and circumstances. And without even any prompting, we will immediately form thoughts about that. Like we will immediately have a narrative that's driven by our fears or our motivations. We're going to start thinking about it. We're going to start making judgments. Well, we feel based on how we think. So like, for instance, I'm just going to use myself as an example. My trigger as a 5 is being surprised or overwhelmed. Let me talk about how that works. So if I get into a place where I am put on the spot, I am surprised by something or overwhelmed. They're like, hey, Kelly, can you present this in 15 minutes? I'm like, oh, that's a trigger for me because my core fear is looking foolish. So if I'm being triggered by being overwhelmed or surprised, I immediately start thinking, oh my God, people are going to think this is stupid. They're going to think I'm dumb. They're going to think I'm not smart. I'm going to look so silly. Well, how do I feel? I feel nervous. I feel anxious. I start to shrink. I get small. I withdraw. Well, how do I behave? Well, I just get quiet. I get nervous. I get shaky. I start holding back parts of myself. I don't, project myself with confidence. And that leads to my results. The results that I get is I lose connection with people. I don't get my ideas out into the world. So the only thing that we can change in that is we can't change our triggers. Our triggers will always be our triggers because they're part of our number, but we can change our relationship with our thoughts. We can change our relationship with the fears that we have. I can start asking myself the question, like, is it really true that I will look foolish? Is it really true that being put on the spot is going to make me, look not smart? As a 1, and I'll go through all of these for you guys, a 1's trigger is being criticized because being criticized induces a fear that they're not good or right. Is it true that, receiving criticism means I'm not good or right? Well, no, that's not true. So we can start to question those things and we can start to use different thoughts. One of the things I like to think of is if I'm going to be put on the spot, if that's my trigger, I have to think about what are the results that I want. Well, the result I want in that moment of being called and surprised is connection. Well, I always want to be connected with people. I want people to feel like they're being connected with me. Well, how do I reverse the thought cycle I gave you in the workbook. So how do I reverse engineer that? Based on the results that I want, what behaviors do I need to display? And then what emotions would lead to those behaviors? And how can I get myself in that feeling state? So here's what I want to do. Today, I want to walk through in pages 3 through 5 of your workbook. I've just given all of you an overview of all of the types, their core fears, their core desires, their motivations, and where they shift to, what line they shift to when they're looking for growth. And that's some things you can kind of do on your own in homework. And if you're really interested in how you shift into growth and your growth paths, I'm going to talk more about my December 16th workshop tomorrow, because it's all about 5 paths for your personal growth. Okay. So in your workbooks, and whether you know your number and maybe the people around you know their number, I always say we don't want to type people, because typing people in the Enneagram is really hard because it's based on motivation, not behavior. We can behave alike in many ways, but our motivation for doing so is different. Okay. So many types can procrastinate, but our motivation on why we're procrastinating is all different. That's why I suggest we don't type people. But if you know your type, if you know your boss's type, if you know your colleagues or direct reports type, because they've told you, these questions can also be used for that. So as I go through these, type your questions in the chat. Okay, this is like anything that you want to know about me talking about this. So Enneagram 1s. Hi D, you're not late. You're right on time. I'm right on time for me talking about my favorite Enneagram 1s. Enneagram 1s, your trigger is being criticized. Because oftentimes this activates kind of this core fear of, oh my gosh, what if I'm not perfect? Okay, like what if I'm flawed in some way? What if I'm not seen as good or right? So I want you to notice that about yourself. The next thing I want you to think about, and I'm going to give every type 3 leadership building or coaching questions that you can ask to shift your mindset, to get out of like a fear and a reaction behavior, and to just kind of slow yourself down and think about your conscious next choices, okay? Because when we start to notice our triggers, we can go through on a noticing assignment. And that's what I give a lot of my clients, is a noticing assignment. I want you to just go through the world and notice how you're triggered, and just kind of stop and make a conscious choice that you're going to react differently. So 3 questions. Enneagram 1, your trigger is being criticized. It can also be somebody else's lack of timeliness or their lack of follow through. 3 questions you can ask. Serenity. In the moment of you being triggered, I want you to notice everything that's working. That's assignment number 1. Notice everything that's working. Even if it's a daily practice, notice everything that's working. Number 2, why is it so important to be right? Your version of right. Does your pursuit of being right in your own eyes keep you from being happy or excellent? And question number 3, how could this be a both and instead of black or white? Sometimes 1s as leaders can tend into black and white thinking. We're going to do it this way or that way, right or wrong. As a leader, and you're thinking about leading your teams, how could we do a both and? How can both things be true at the same time? How could we maybe marry 2 approaches? Okay. And if you want, of course, this will be on replay. You can come back, you can rewind me and write all these down. Enneagram 2. Your trigger is being taken for granted. Some other things that can trigger you, and again, my 1s and 2s, if you're in here, and as I go through, tell me if this hits you, okay? So Enneagram 2s, it can also be not being heard. It could be being excluded, or seeing someone else be treated in a not so awesome manner. So that can be very triggering for you. Notice as you go through your life. 3 leadership building questions you can ask yourself or 2s in your life. Ask yourself this, especially as a leader. As a leader in a 2, you like to give, do, I'll do it, I'll take it, okay? In your giving, what are you taking away from others? I coach a lot of 2s as leaders. And one of the things that 2s find helpful to notice is that when they solve other people's problems, it very inadvertently robs people of their own problem-solving abilities. So in your giving, what are you taking away from others? Question number 2, what time are you spending every day to ground yourself and focus on your own needs? I often give an assignment to just say, you know what, every day I want you to think of your own needs. And I know this is hard as a 2, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Question number 3, how are you replenishing your own tank every day? What are you doing for self-care? And self-care is not just bubble baths. It can just be intentional time that you take for yourself and tend to your own needs. So, Enneagram 3, your trigger is being set up for failure. So let me know if this resonates with you guys. It could be not looking good professionally, being blamed for the poor work of others, or not receiving credit for your work. Ooh, I know that really gets some 3s. So notice these triggers and stop and notice how you respond. And instead, here's 3 questions or 3 practices you can use to build your skills and shift your mindset as a leader. Who are you without a status or a title? I want you to do some journaling on that. Who are you without a status or a title? And how can that free you in the workplace from chasing after status and titles? Ask yourself, do you really want this? This is my favorite question that I ask of 3s. I have 3 clients who are 3s. And I ask them all the time when they come to their coaching sessions and they're all excited about a new opportunity. I say, do you want this? Do you want this? Is this aligned to your values or desires? Or are you saying yes because you think it's an opportunity to impress others and just show again how successful you can be? And the third question for 3s is, how can you create intentional failure points? Because remember, 3s fear failure. So what if you actually built in intentional failure points so that you can search for learning and get experienced with getting resilient, that resilience that comes with failure, and stop airbrushing it and avoiding it. Enneagram 4s, your trigger is being ignored or slighted. And as an Enneagram 4, gosh, Sue, I think it was you who said you were unsure if you were a 4 or a 9. So this could be helpful for you. And same thing with D, you as a 1 or an 8, noticing these triggers. As a 4, you can be triggered by being asked to do something that's contrary with your values, or an event that elicits your envy. Because remember, 4s sometimes believe that they were born with something missing. And so they can get a little envious. So 4s, 3 things that you can do to boost your leadership skills. Every day, do a body scan, and I want you to just get grounded. Just get grounded in your body to get kind of out of your overactive heart center and just get really grounded in your body and notice the sensations in your body. If you can, just do a scan from your toes all the way to your head to get grounded in your body. When you kind of get caught up in your emotions, sometimes 4s, even as leaders and employees, spouses, partners, friends, we tend to wrap narratives around the facts. Everything's a story. There's a story around the facts, story around the facts. This must mean that. I want you to write all that out and circle just the facts. So when you're kind of getting caught up in this awfulizing story, I want you to write it out and circle only the facts, and then just kind of drop the narrative. And then the third thing for 4s is when you're kind of all up in your feelings, I want you to get active. What's one small step you can take to get active so that you can kind of get unstuck from all of these feelings? So tell me in the chat, I'm halfway through. Even though these might not be your numbers, do you guys find these helpful for any number? Like I feel like a lot of these leadership and coaching questions are really helpful for each number. But like when I read through these as a 5, like I still find a lot of these helpful. And these can be great coaching and leadership building questions, no matter someone's number. So let me know which ones are resonating with you. Share in the chat if you heard one coaching question or practice that you're like, I'm just using it because that sounds awesome. So Enneagram 5. Your trigger is being overwhelmed or surprised. This is me. And it can also be private information being shared. Oh, that is a huge trigger for me. Huge. When I find out that like something that was private got shared publicly, it's like my heart's racing just talking about it. Dishonesty or false information, or being prompted for an instant emotional response. So questions for Enneagram 5s, whether they report to you, they're in your life, or you're a 5 as a leader. a question. Question number 1. When are you taking time to shift from input to output? Because 5s will tend to learn, and they're going to forget to share what they're learning or act on what they're learning. As a 5, I have to do this every week. I have to ask myself, I've learned a lot of things. What have I consciously shared with others? It's huge. Second question for 5s. What can you do outside of yourself that doesn't deplete your energy? So 5s fear the depletion of their own energy or resources. So to get them out and to get them moving, ask them, what are 3 things that you can do at work to volunteer, to get seen, whatever that looks like? What can you do outside of yourself that won't deplete your energy? That's often in alignment with your values. What can you do outside of yourself that's in alignment with your values? I love this question for 5s or any withdrawn type or any assertive type, people who tend to overshare or undershare. And I think you guys will love this, this question as well. Think of your contribution in meetings like poker chips. So if you are a leader who's been told, hey, you need to like amp up your presence, you're not contributing enough, or maybe you're a leader who's been told that you overshare. Hey, you need to ramp it down so that you can allow others to contribute. Think of your contribution like poker chips. You have 3 poker chips. As a 5, how are you going to use all 3 poker chips in the meeting so that you can be seen and heard? I love this too for overshares. You only got 3 poker chips, sister or mister. How are you going to use your poker chips wisely so you're not using 20 poker chips when everybody else is using 1? So I love that. And I'm reading some of these. Getting active when you're stuck in your head. Karen, yes, I'm going to talk about that more tomorrow. Creating the intentional failure points. Hillary, you're an energy hoarder. Hillary, you were talking about 3 or 9. Huge aha for you right here. This is a huge aha for you. That tends to be more of a 9 thing than a 3 thing. But I want you to read all the types and let me know what you come up with. Enneagram 6, your trigger is being under external pressure. Other things that can trigger a 6 is another person's lack of genuineness, someone else's lack of commitment, or an abusive use of authority. So questions you can ask yourself as a 6 or the 6s that you know. When have you trusted your intuition and it worked? Keep a diary of this. Second thing, keep a success journal as evidence of success, because 6s sometimes don't inherently trust themselves. They're always looking externally for reassurance, validation. They're always looking for like a wise person or a teacher. So keep a journal of your own success to go, oh, I can trust myself. I have been successful before, and these are the things I can rely on. And then the last thing for 6s is reality checking. Name the fear. So 6s get into fear mongering, analysis paralysis. Oh my gosh, what if the sky is falling? Worst case scenario, devil's advocate. Reality check that fear behind it and ask yourself, is that fear true? What's the likelihood that this would happen? So that's super helpful for 6s. D, you have a team member who needs to be on a limited amount of poker chips. Haven't we all thought that? But you know, I love this. As a leader, I had an oversharer. And gosh, I wish I would have had this to say, like, girlfriend, you got 3 poker chips. Trust me, this will help you kind of focus and intentionally contribute. And you know, I had undersharers who were brilliant. And I was like, use your 3 poker chips. Enneagram 7, your trigger is being confined or restricted. So it can also be being expected to do boring tasks, being dismissed or not taken seriously, or unjust criticism. So as a 7, 7s feel like they go through the world like just scattered because they have horrible FOMO. I want to experience and do all the things. I want to enjoy all the experiences. I don't want to miss out. So to get them focused, great things for 7s. Number 1, have and hire people who can keep you focused. Wonderful tip. I coached a CEO who is a 7. And one of the things that they said was they had a person that was just diligent. And I don't know if this person was a 1 or what they were, that would every day follow up. Here's your list. What's this thing? What do you got going on? Just kept them focused, and having people around them to help give them structure. It didn't feel confining at all. They felt grateful. Tip number 2, learn to slow down and vet people. Notice who people are in reality And don't fall in love with just their words or their potential, but actually notice things in reality. And the third tip for sevens is just take time to time block and create focus hours. One of some of my sevens, I have lots of friends who are sevens that said this has been incredibly transformative for them, whether they're running businesses or they're a leader, is they like, these are my sacred hours. This is my time block. I've made a promise to myself that every day from these hours, this is my focus time. This is my work time. This is my get shit done time. And this is where I have focus. Let's see. So D says, this is my fear with having an overshare when you have a lot of undershares. Yes. Oh, yes, the poker chips. Enneagram 8, your trigger is being controlled. It can also be others not being direct, being blindsided, or underestimating your strength. So one of the things that I want you guys to know about 8s is 8s have an energy field that lots of people can sense when an 8 comes into the room. And this often catches an 8 off guard because 8s don't realize how they come across to others. They don't realize how others are kind of impacted by their energy. And when an 8 is having a conversation, they might have a really rich discussion and the 8 was like, that's great. And the other person is like, oh my God, they're mad at me. There was so much anger. And the 8s are like, what are you talking about? I'm not angry. That was just robust. So 8s sometimes have been told they're intimidating. Sometimes have been told like that their anger impacts people, and 8s are just like, what? So as an 8, and especially as a woman who is an 8, because I think men who are 8s kind of can get away with this because it's a masculine thing. But like I know me personally as a 5, and I know a lot of the 8s in my life who have a Myers-Briggs that's like an NTJ, logical, rational, direct. These are oftentimes not feminine qualities. So, we have just a whole different experience with that. So 8s, just notice your intensity, and I want you to kind of modulate that. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to have somebody who can give you feedback on your tone. Whether you record yourself leading a meeting, whether you have a trusted colleague or friend that can say, hey, maybe try saying this instead of that. Have somebody that can read your emails before you send them out. It can be incredibly helpful to help you just kind of manage your tone and your intensity, and even use some humor if you can. I have an 8 who says, when I start to infuse some humor into my approach, it kind of disarms a little bit. Question number 3. 8s, I want you to ask this of yourselves, because 8's fear is vulnerability. Ask yourself this: who are others when they are being vulnerable? So for instance, you may have no problem going and helping a neighbor without being asked who you knew had surgery, and you're going to go rake their leaves. You have no problem with them being vulnerable. But ask yourself, who are you when you are vulnerable? Lots of times the 8s have no problem with everybody else's vulnerability, but they struggle with their own, and they struggle asking for help. So I love that point of self-reflection and leading and being a little bit more vulnerable in their leadership. All right, type 9s, your trigger is being in conflict. Okay, so other triggers for a 9 is receiving too many demands, experiencing rudeness in others, feeling taken advantage of, or not feeling connected. So as a 9, sometimes 9s can be a little passive aggressive because they don't want to create conflict. They struggle because they think that initiating a conflict or having a courageous conversation will create disconnection and everything will fall apart. So as 9s, I want you to speak up. That's tip number 1. Speak up. Don't just accept. You matter, and asking for what you need won't cause conflict or disconnection. So maybe just in your journal, ask yourself, how have I asked for what I needed today? Number 2, for 9s, notice how your desire to avoid conflict and resort to passivity, being just passive about things, actually creates more conflict. As a leader, sometimes people who work for 9s, or whether we have 9s on our team, say, well, I don't know where they stand on things. And because they won't take a stand because they're afraid they're going to cause conflict, is actually causing more conflict on the team. So just notice that. And then the third question, practice naming your desires. Like name them. Sometimes nines can acquiesce to kind of what everybody else wants and just kind of go along. Okay, that sounds good. Yep, whatever you want. They don't actually stop and think about what they want. So start a practice where you name your desires every day. What do you want? And stop assuming your thoughts will be overlooked. All right, guys, so I hope all that was helpful, and you might be, and I would love to share any ahas. Again, now that I've gone by the end, share your favorite practice or a coaching question that you're going to use or any questions you have. So it's kind of like the now what, so what. So no matter what your type was, I hope that one of these questions resonated with you just to help you get out of your own trigger, your own limiting beliefs, and kind of into a place that moves you closer to your highest self so that you can be more effective as a leader. Because again, the more we work on ourselves as leaders, the more evolved we are as leaders, the more we can evolve our team as productive leaders, employees, etc. 2 questions for you. Now that you kind of know this about yourself, how might your coworkers and direct reports perceive you? This will be some of your homework. It's going to be in the workbook. And how might this explain some of the conflict issues or the communication issues that you've had at work? So same as yesterday, you're going to get a recap email. Take a look at these things, listen to the replay. In the homework, I'm going to have you answer what coaching question just hit you or coaching questions that you're going to use. Notice how learning some of this might help give you insight on how you are perceived as a leader. And then number 3, how might some of this explain some of the conflicts or communications that you've had at work? So that's your homework. There will be a homework post that you can post. And again, on December 4th, I'm going to draw a prize. So the more you contribute, the more chances you have to win the prize. So if you guys have questions, and as always, if you're watching on replay, I will go in, I will answer your questions, give you all the information that you want. Thank you all for joining me today. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about using all 3 of your centers of intelligence, all 3 brains. And I'm actually going to give you some practices, and we're going to do a practice together to help you kind of access more than just your intellectual brain. So hope you guys have an awesome day, and I will see you all back here tomorrow. Talk to you guys later.